Welcome to this recording of the Sunday morning message from worship at Hudson Wesleyan Church. We trust the time you spend in the Word of God with us today will be transformational to your spirit and enhance your relationship with Jesus Christ. Want to find out more about a relationship with God and the work He is doing at Hudson Wesleyan Church? Visit www.hudsonwesleyan.org. Now, here is Pastor Wes Rowan with today's message.
In Luke chapter 24, I'm not going to read the entire text for you, but I am going to tell it to you. The account from Luke chapter 24 of Jesus walking on the road with these two disciples who were coming from Jerusalem back to Emmaus, which was about 7 miles, a little over 7 miles from Jerusalem. The best that we can tell from how the account is written is that this journey with them takes place later in the day on Resurrection Sunday. And that means that it takes place about 3 days, 3 full 24-hour periods after Jesus ate that meal with his disciples that Sharon read for us. It seems like an eternity has passed. Think about all the things that took place between that meal that he'd had with his disciples and this meal that he sits down to after walking on the road with these disciples on the way back to Emmaus. Think about everything that's happened. He goes to the garden. He's betrayed. He's arrested. He is tortured. He is condemned. He's executed. He's buried. The disciples have fled, abandoning him, have gone off into private places where they can hide. The rumors have started to come in that he has risen from the dead. The women are reporting the tomb is empty. You've never had an emotional roller coaster like these people had in those 3 days. And now, according to what Luke tells us in this account, there is confusion. Not joy, not for everybody just yet. There is confusion. And so Jesus is walking with them on this road, and it tells us there are two disciples that he catches up to. He comes up from behind them, if you will, and starts walking with them on the way to this little town. And they're frustrated, they're overwhelmed, and they're saying, I don't know. I don't know what to think. We know what we're hearing, but they're still in the mode of being overwhelmed by the sadness of Jesus having died. And when they get to Emmaus, Jesus begins to bid them farewell. They say, this is where we live. And he's, okay. He has been explaining to them and talking with them the whole time that they're on the road about the realities of the Messiah. And they think in that context, as I've preached before, that Jesus just doesn't get it. All those things that they thought about the Messiah that were true must not have been true about this man that they had seen crucified. And so, as they are going on their way, stepping into their home, they say to Jesus, come, why don't you come in and sit down with us? And so Jesus goes in to their home and he sits down at the table with them. And when he sits down, of course, having walked 7 miles, I don't know if you've ever walked or ran 7 miles, but they are hungry. It's been a long day, and they realize that they need food. And so they sit down with Jesus. And they put food on the table. It's getting to be evening now. Again, the best we can tell, this is the end of the day of resurrection. And they put food on the table, and Jesus sits down to have a meal with them. And he takes the bread and he breaks it and he blesses it so that they can eat. And then he disappears from their sight. And these two disciples are left at a table with no Jesus, but a different presence of reality. And they say, that was him. We knew. How could we have been so stupid? Didn't our hearts burn while he was speaking to us? Didn't we feel drawn that we had heard that teaching before? As I've preached other times, similar to when Peter and John are out in the boat post-resurrection and Jesus shows up on the shore. And they catch all the fish again, and Peter goes, oh, wait, I know that story. I know that voice. So the disciples here, when Jesus vanishes, they say, we knew who that was. Weren't our hearts warmed by what he was saying? I want to consider the meal that Jesus eats with his disciples in the Last Supper and what I would call the first or second supper that he now shares with these disciples. We know he also shared meals. Interestingly enough, you could do an entire sermon series on the meals that Jesus eats after his resurrection. He shows up in the room, doesn't he, where they're all hiding, and eats there so they'll know he's real. He eats the fish with them on the shore when they've been out fishing, and he eats here, sits down at the table with them. But I want to look at this meal in particular and the one of the Last Supper and talk about the table that has been set for Jesus to show up. The table has been set. There are things that we learn from these two stories. First, we recognize that Jesus shows up to a table that is prepared for him. Isn't it interesting that in neither of these accounts, the food, the location, the house, the table, none of it is Jesus's. It's not his. He's the guest. The preparation has been done by somebody else. In the Last Supper, as Sharon read for us, he sends the disciples on ahead and says, go into the city, you will find a man, follow him, ask him for his room, and prepare the Passover, and then I will come. In the road to Emmaus, he goes to their home. It's their food. Presumably, they have him sit down while they put the food on the table. It's a table prepared by other people. When Jesus shows up and does something powerful and miraculous, he's not necessarily starting from scratch. He's coming into an environment where it has been prepared for him to show up. This is why worship is so important. It's not because you can't be a Christian without worship or going to church. Being a Christian is being a Christ follower, one who models their life after Christ. But I continue to contend, as has been the Christian tradition down through the ages, that you will not very long imitate a Jesus that you are not regularly worshiping. And so the reason that worship is so important and corporate worship is so important and private worship is so important is because you're setting a table for Jesus to arrive. When we do worship services every Sunday, we're not sure who all is going to be here. what guests, what regular attendees, who's feeling well, who'll be here, who won't be. But we know this, that Jesus will show up where we have prepared for him to arrive. And so when you come into worship, when you open your Bible, when you take communion, when you are participating in the acts of worship, when you pray, are you doing it with a heart of expectation that says, I believe Jesus will show up because I have prepared for him to be here? What if we read our Bible not with a sense of I need to make sure I read my Bible today, but a sense of saying, I wonder where Jesus is going to show up while I'm reading? What if we came to church, and listen, we pastors are the worst at this, but what if we came to church not thinking about all the things that are going to happen in the service that we need to make sure happen so that we can say we went to church? But what if we came to church with an anticipation of, I wonder what it's going to be like to encounter Jesus? So Jesus shows up to a table that is prepared by others. Next, apparently, Jesus does not mandate who else comes to his table. Isn't that interesting? Jesus does not stand at the door when the table has been set and when he shows up and check tickets of who's allowed to come sit at his table. It's the exact opposite of how it works in this world. If you wanted to go to an event where a head of state was going to be, or the president, or even a senator, or your governor, or sometimes even a local celebrity, if you want to go to an event where they're going to be, you don't just get to walk up to them. You don't just get to sit down with them. Most of the time, in the political sense, and understandably so, like if you're going to have a meal with somebody who's in power or authority, you're making a donation. You're making a contribution. You don't just get to have that kind of access. We put a rope outside the venue. We say only certain people are going to get in here, because it's not just open to everyone. Jesus does not mandate who is allowed to come to experience him. Think about the Last Supper. Think about the people who are sitting around his table. There's a betrayer. There's a denier. There's a whole host of them that are going to run. The ones who will pretend like they don't even know him when push comes to shove. And he knows that it's them, and he still allows them at his table. The Emmaus disciples. If you were going to make a table of people who get to spend time with Jesus, I'm not sure we would pick people who think he's still dead and who are confused and upset, and they're not celebrating that he's alive. He walks this whole way with them on the journey, and never once do they say, it's good to see you again. We thought you were gone for sure. They keep talking about how dead he is, and yet he has them at the table. We should be no more stringent about who gets to be at the table than Jesus is. It's his event. So wherever Jesus is going to show up, the table, the place of gathering, the place of experiencing, the place of fellowship with him is open to anybody who will come. Anybody who knows that they need it. Now, do not confuse this with saying, so it doesn't matter, everybody can just come to Jesus as they are. He doesn't have any standards. He doesn't have any parameters. No, everybody who comes to encounter Jesus at the place of fellowshipping with him will have to face the truth. Remember that Jesus has been doing this since the beginning of his ministry. When he goes to Matthew's house and they call all the people together that are Matthew's friends, you think the other disciples, had their minds blown that Jesus would invite a tax collector to be one of their number? Think about how weird it was when the first party they go to is at his house with all his friends. The tax collector friends, they weren't the cream of the Jewish crop, as far as most of the population was concerned. But Jesus has been doing this all along. He sits with sinners. He talks to the lepers. He goes and spends time with people that nobody else wants to be around. This is how Jesus functions. And if that's how Jesus is going to function, shame on any Christian that will draw a line anywhere else than where Jesus drew it. And that is that all are welcome to his table. Will they be confronted with the truth? Yes. Will they have to make a decision about pursuing truth and whether or not they will embrace it? Yes. Ought they to come with sincerity and wanting to encounter him? Yes. But even the Emmaus disciples are sitting at a table not realizing what they're about to encounter. He's right across the table from them. And there it is. And so Jesus does not mandate who comes to the place of encountering him. Further, Jesus changes the purpose of what is going to happen at the table. Why had the disciples gathered around the table with Jesus there at the Last Supper? Why were they there? It was Passover. This is a meal that they had been celebrating together as a group for a couple of years. This is a meal that they had ingrained in them and been experiencing their entire Jewish lives. They knew what it was about. It was a point of remembrance. It was a looking back. It was the delivery from Egypt. It was the goodness of God for them. They knew when they sat down at that Passover what it was all about. And sure enough, Jesus takes them right through the Passover meal. But then something happens. When supper was over, he takes the bread and the cup that are at the table and he repurposes them. He institutes a brand new concept for them. And he says, as Sharon read for us, this is now something different. Whenever you do this now, you will do it because of me. I can't say this for 100% certain from the original Greek. I'm not a good enough Greek scholar, and I didn't read it that way. But I will tell you what I know about foreign language and about Greek enough that I think it would not surprise me if this is how you should actually read that text. Not that Jesus said, as often as you do this in remembrance of me, like you're just remembering something about me. I think probably what he was saying is, when you do this, remember me. Don't just remember what happened to me. So communion, for example, is not just a remembering what he's done. It's a coming to a table and remembering him. You see the difference? Yeah, we remember what he's done too, but we're keeping the focus on him even now and what he's doing now. We remember him. So he changes the purpose of the table. The Emmaus disciples, he's sitting with them at the end of a long day. They're exhausted. They've had a long journey. They're emotionally depleted. Okay? They're emotionally eating right now. It's been a long, trying couple of days, and they got a table of food. They think that this meal is just to satisfy their hunger from the journey, to satisfy the drain that they feel after these last several days. But it's not. Jesus is about to change the purpose of that gathering place. From now on, they will never sit down to a meal and have the bread broken and blessed without remembering the day that a dead Jesus showed up at their house for dinner and then disappeared. They'll never forget it. The table will always be changed. When you come to a relationship with Jesus, the places where you have encountered him will never be the same. And when you are in a relationship with Jesus, the purposes with which you go through life will never be the same. You getting up in the morning is for a different reason. You going to work throughout the day is for a different reason. It's not just to pay the bills anymore, although it still does that. It's for a different reason. You've been given purpose and vocation in your life by Jesus. The people that you encounter, the people in your neighborhoods, your kids, your family, your extended family, your co-workers, they all take on new meaning when Jesus has possession. Coming to church takes on new meaning when Jesus is involved. You say, wait a minute, wasn't Jesus always involved in coming to church? Well, I would venture that there's a lot of people that go to church that don't have much involvement with Jesus. But when he is burning within your soul, oh, it's a whole different experience. The Bible, what you learn, it all takes on new meaning because Jesus changes the purpose of the meeting place. Isn't that the beautiful thing about a well laid out table? It's more than just a place of sustenance. It's a place of interaction. You know, that's why coffee shops are so popular. Because if you're going to sit down and have a conversation with somebody, isn't it better to do it over a nice hot beverage? Maybe a little muffin or something, a bagel. It works better that way, right? You want to have conversation? You invite somebody over. How often do you ever, ladies, let me talk to you in particular, how often have you ever invited someone to come over to the house and said to yourself, they probably won't? Never. Now, you may have said to yourself, I don't know what I'm going to feed them. But there's this expectation that if we're fellowshipping, we're eating. So the table is representative of the place of gathering. And Jesus changes the purpose of the table. It's something else. It's something more. And then finally, not only does he change the purpose of the table, Jesus also changes the people that are at the table. Now, in the account from the Last Supper, we know that there are people who are sitting at that table who are going to have some rough days ahead of them. One in particular who was not going to change at all. He was going to walk out of there and go betray Jesus. And that's why I say the people who come to the table, they still have to decide what they're going to do with the truth. But that's why when I give the invitation to communion, for example, I say anybody who is willing to come and walk in fellowship with Jesus. Because even if you're not there, if you're willing, then the table is a place for you. But it's a place where you are changed. So even some of those disciples who weren't changed in that instance, they became changed when they ate their next meal with him, when he's in the room with them, when he appears after his resurrection, when he's on the seaside with them, when he's at the Emmaus apartment and they're having the meal. He changes them. I said a few minutes ago that those disciples would never sit down to a meal again and not remember the time that Jesus showed up at their house. But it's for more than just the fact that he was there and he disappeared. It's more than just what happened. They will never forget it because they themselves were uniquely transformed in that experience. Because Jesus doesn't show up places and people go away the same. Can I say that again? This isn't in my notes and it's not on there, but if you're taking notes, I would write this down. Jesus does not show up places and have people go away the same. As your pastor, as someone who myself wrestles back and forth on how to experience this, can I say then that if we come to church and we go away the same, maybe we weren't ready to encounter Jesus? Because I don't see any examples in the New Testament where Jesus shows up and everybody just goes, oh, that was nice. That was good. Jesus changes the people at the table. Now, I got to thinking, wouldn't it be nice then if we had a table where we could sit with Jesus? Wouldn't it be nice if we could just take those Emmaus disciples and throw them out of the picture, bring it into the 21st century, and sit down at a table and have Jesus break the bread right in front of us? Wouldn't it be nice to be able to say, oh, we hear his voice. He's telling us all about himself and his plan and his mission. Wouldn't it be good to be able to encounter him in that way? A place where we have prepared for him to come, and a place where all are welcome, and a place where he changes the meaning of our gathering, and then he turns around and changes us. What would we give to be in that environment? I remember, some of you maybe also grew up with this or remember these, but I remember the Adventures and Odyssey stories that Focus on the Family used to put out. And some of my favorite ones of those stories growing up as a kid were the ones where they used the imagination station. Do you remember that? And it was basically a way to go back and experience Bible stories or historical things from a first-person perspective. It was like AI before AI was a thing, okay? And so the whole thing that is so impressive or valuable about that kind of experience is always thinking, what would it be like to have actually sat there and heard Jesus? Wouldn't it be great if we could sit there and watch him break the bread and disappear and, wow, Jesus is here. We want that. We would like to put ourselves into the story. But my friends, we have a place. We have multiple places, but we have one that is special and unique, where if you take away the food and you take away everyone else and you just pause before Jesus, you find out that he is still offering the bread and the cup to us. And we experience it in the setting of worship, but it is no less a table than the table that he sat at with his disciples. Because all you need is him and you and the elements that he offers. Now, communion is not the only place where we experience Jesus, but it is a place that he instituted that meets all those other requirements that we've already talked about. It is a table that we have prepared at his behest. It was his idea, but we prepared it. It's a table that he has visited before. We know he shows up here because he said he would, and he's done it before. It is a table that is open to anybody who will come and experience him. Some traditions, I know, have a little more of a boundary process in who takes communion. And I don't fault them for their theology on that. It's not how I read it. It's not how I've experienced it. But I don't fault them for that. I think it's to try to protect the sacredness of the sacrament. And I myself sometimes have gone back about how do we protect the sacredness of the sacrament and still be open. But this much I do believe is true. Every time Jesus is at a table in the New Testament, it looks like he's inviting everybody to come who wants to have some of him. So this is not a ticketed event. It is open. It is a table where he changes the meaning of what's going on. You could go to the store and you can go home and you can take bread and juice and put it into your body and let your body start the chemical process of drawing the nutrients out of that food. And it's the same chemical process that happens with this little bit of food that's here. By the way, that's one of the things that's beautiful about communion is how physical it is. But when this happens, there is something going on here where Jesus has changed this experience. Now, I am your pastor. I'm supposed to be able to explain to you exactly what it is that he's doing here. I don't know. I know that it is an avenue of grace that is additional to the daily grace that he gives us. And I believe that the reason that it is an additional avenue of grace is because we are doing those things that he said. We are preparing and we are saying, Jesus, you show up in a whole lot of places and ways when we're not always expecting, and sometimes we miss it and we don't know, whatever. But there's one thing we know for sure. When we do this, you're there because you said you would be. And grace is that additional work of God, unmerited by us, but on our behalf and in us. And so, we are going to conclude our service today at the table. The body and the blood of Jesus, which were given for you, are hereby represented in a way that he chose, bread and cup. And by taking them, remembering him, not just remembering what he did, but remembering what he's doing now, we are pulling in on an extra vein of grace. It's open to everybody who wants Jesus. So whether you are walking in complete victory with him this morning, whether you have stumbled this week, whether you are frustrated, whether you are overwhelmed by some circumstance, whether you have some great joy that you are celebrating, whatever the circumstances are of your life, if you have sinned, if you have already been forgiven, if you have been confronted with issues that you're dealing with, whatever it is, the table is set. Jesus has promised, and if you come, he's here, and he changes us. And that's the beauty of the table.